Welcome to the Legit Football NFL podcast. Brian McFadden here. We are going to be recapping the AFC and NFC title games. I picked the correct winners, but they certainly didn't go down the way we thought they would. We're going to be breaking in. It's just me and my man Kevin Phillip Fox to break down what we saw over the weekend. We only have one more recap left before we dive into the offseason, but we will take the football that we can get, Kevin.
That's right, man. Yeah, it was great to watch football all day yesterday. I think I would agree with you that it didn't go down how we thought it would, and it didn't go down in much of a traditional sense at all in either game. So that was kind of a little bit of a gut punch for the fan bases that didn't get their way. I could definitely see a little bit of frustration by either team, but here we are. That's the way the cookie crumbles. We've all been through that as NFL fans at this point. So we still got football to talk about, and we still got 2 weeks left to enjoy the amazingness that is the NFL season. So let's bask in it.
I think one of the things I'm going to emphasize in today's show is we're going to acknowledge some of the unfortunate realities that these fan bases had to deal with.
Yeah.
While at the same time making sure to give credit to the teams that won, because I do think the teams that won earned their victories.
I completely agree. I think it's a little tougher when a quarterback like Purdy goes down and it's already your third string. I get it. Like it's a part of the game. The officiating stuff, I'm way more on board with. Like just saying, like it's part of the game. Let's not, right? Like you said, let's not discredit the effort of the Chiefs. I feel like there's a lot of that happening, and yeah, I don't think that that's ever fair, except for maybe the NFC Championship game. What was it, Saints Rams? That one might have been fair. The pass interference.
Oh, that's true. I mean, it literally led to at least a 1 year review of pass interferences. That's how much of an impact it had on that game. But we didn't have a moment like that exactly.
I agree.
But let's go ahead and dive in. You mentioned Purdy, so let's dive into the first game. San Francisco 49ers traveling to Lincoln Financial Field to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. This was the matchup that I was really looking forward to. Yeah. Not that I don't love Burrow and Mahomes, but these two teams were the most complete, best rosters. We mentioned that on Friday's preview show.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, we didn't get to see the full spectrum, especially on the San Francisco side. Philadelphia ends up winning 31-7, but it really wasn't a 31-7 type game. It was a slugfest. However, a slugfest that I felt Philadelphia was in control of the whole game. Let's go ahead and jump into the biggest moment here. And on the third offensive play of the game for the San Francisco 49ers, Brock Purdy gets hit by Hassan Reddick, bends his elbow back. Not too dissimilar from what I'm seeing at the injury that Josh Allen suffered against the Jets earlier this year.
I have the same exact thought.
Maybe a more severe version of that.
Yeah.
But Purdy leaves the game, comes back later. We're going to dive into that too. But let's talk about it from a high level, Kevin.
Yeah.
How did you feel seeing that with Purdy going out so early? Josh Johnson, their fourth starting quarterback for the 49ers in the NFC title game.
I think like devastation is like the best word I can use to highlight it, because yeah, I was really excited for that game. You said it yourself. There was just this anticipation, these heavyweights, these defenses, all this talent, these running games, these schemes. And on the third play of the game, one of the most important pieces, believe it or not, given how fast that happened for Brock Purdy, we've learned, I think that game taught us that it's not just him being a robot and, doing this, like doing that, doing what Shanahan says. Like, you need a competent, like between the ears, somebody who can make some plays, somebody who can make the right reads. And, Josh Johnson's always been a fine backup, but Josh Johnson did not do what Brock Purdy's been doing. And there's no way that can really be, you can't discredit Purdy. I think that game solidified Purdy's value a little bit and showed us what Purdy's been doing. But definitely a feeling of devastation washed over me, I would say, when that happened. How did you feel?
I mean, you saw a significant drop-off in production right off the bat. You had multiple delayed games early on when Josh Johnson came in. That's one of the things that, whether you're just not sharp enough with the playbook, Josh Johnson hasn't, they brought him on mid-season. This isn't a guy who spent the entire season with San Francisco.
Right.
You saw the fumbled snap. He made a few nice passes, but he wasn't super decisive. You didn't see that playmaking ability that you've seen from Purdy throughout most of the games that he started. But all of these little things add up when you're facing one of the best defenses in the NFL on the other side of the ball. But here's the kind of cold water for Niners fans, and we're going to talk about they were penalized 11 times. I want to talk about the Devontae Smith play early on, but even if you take that stuff out, the Eagles had nearly a 62% pressure rate throughout this game, and they didn't lose any offensive linemen. So you can't. We need to remember that it's not like Trent Williams went out of the game. Mike McGlinchey on the right side. The fact that Purdy got hurt in the first place is because they put Tyler Kroft to back up tight end on Hassan Reddick, and who he stood no chance, got right in and got to get to Purdy's arm, and they sent Josh Johnson out later in the game with a concussion. So we have to remember that the Eagles maybe didn't move the ball that well in offense, but you're facing a phenomenal defense. But that pass rush, as we were talking about on Friday's show, made such a difference.
It showed up, man. They got the horses, Javon, Hassan, like they really do have the horses, man, up front to make an impact on the game. And Hassan Reddick was playing like a man possessed. His hair was on fire. He had something to prove in that game. And you make a great point. That's not something that would have been too different if Brock Purdy was in the game. Maybe he has the answer. Maybe he knows where to go with the ball a little sooner. But we didn't see that on the first series. And yeah, a mechanism I'm all too familiar with. The Josh Allen elbow thing. Yeah, Purdy's got a potential stretch of recovery heading, in advance. I hope it's not too bad because I would love to see
the results today because there's concern that possibly he ruptured it as opposed to just being a sprain. But that was a possibility. They're not saying that's what they think it is, but that's a much different recovery, obviously with surgery involved, than what Josh Allen had, where it's just more like you just have to wait for it to heal.
Yeah, they were discussing the possibility of that for Josh the first week, and being the anxiety king that I am, I was going crazy on social media and reading everything I could about the UCL. So I'm unfortunately a little more versed in it than I would like to be. But yeah, I hope to God it's not ruptured. That would be awful for that young man's career. That would be tough.
But one thing you mentioned that this solidified Purdy to you, and in my mind it did too. It was already solidified. However, I think we're going to see a discourse in the media about now all of a sudden our last memory of Brock Purdy is through no fault of his own, he couldn't throw the ball. I mean, literally couldn't throw the ball. He told Shanahan, this was in the press conference, they asked him about it. He told Shanahan, look, I'm sorry, I can't throw the ball deep. Like, if you want me to throw, I can throw a short pass, but I can't throw the ball deep.
Gosh.
So there's a little bit of that. Like, that's going to be recency bias is just rampant in the NFL in particular. True. People remember that.
Yeah.
And certain, maybe Niners fans will say, well, why didn't Purdy go back in? Josh Allen got injured. He didn't miss any time. So it's like, it's not exactly the same. The injury might have been more severe. But I think that Purdy should be the starter to start this season. I think we've seen enough out of Trey Lance in a longer period of time, 2 off seasons, and how much Purdy ran this offense this year. And then the second they put Josh Johnson in, what a drop off it was. And I know we only got like 3 snaps of Purdy, but I think he would have been more competent. I think they would have scored more than 7 points had Brock Purdy been the quarterback. I think the Eagles still would have won.
Yeah.
But to me, that should be more of a reflection that, hey, Purdy actually is the quarterback and should start next year that way.
I totally agree. And I am somewhat looking forward to this discourse because I don't really feel like the Trey Lance truthers or the Jimmy G should come back truthers have really much of a case. I mean, Purdy's on a 7th round rookie contract for 3 more years. And so long as his health isn't significantly impacted, we saw what he can do. I don't think there's any way you can discredit Brock Purdy's work this year. I mean, 7-1 in 8 games, and the 1 is asterisk because he couldn't throw.
Hey, he had a perfect completion percentage.
Right? I mean, those dump offs were good dump offs.
Quality 4-yard passes.
He also does. This is going to sound like a joke, but he does a great job with those delayed handoffs too. He's pretty good. He's got that sort of like college style, like dangle the ball out long enough to let I'm impressed with Brock Purdy, and the poise didn't go away when the injury happened, and it didn't seem like the leadership went away. He seemed like he was trying to be the guy, and I feel like this is an off-season argument that we're on the same side of, but I do think the drumbeat is going to get louder for the other guys, and I'm looking forward to the discourse because I don't I'm looking forward to dunking on some people, man. I think we're gonna win this one.
So let's talk about the Devontae Smith play. And we at least have to acknowledge it. So
Definitely.
first drive for the Eagles at the Niners 35, 4th down and 3, I believe it was. And Jalen Hurts, by the way, threw a beautiful pass. Rolled out to his left, evaded pressure, and threw a dime. And what I even tweeted, like, wow, what an amazing catch or something along those lines.
Yeah.
It looked phenomenal. The broadcast, Greg Olsen was like, wow, that's such a good catch. Like, nobody
He was looking at
questioned
the
it.
feet. Yeah, Olsen was looking at the feet.
Right,
He didn't.
feet. He got the leg down. Is like
Yep.
that's what I looked at too. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
definitely caught it.
We didn't have a great angle of the ball until I think after even the touchdown, if I remember correctly.
When they went back and they showed multiple angles.
Yeah.
I think the only thing, I actually had a guy in one of my Dynasty chats saying, and he's a Niners fan, so take that. He's like, oh, I think he dropped that. Look at how they're hustling back. And I'm like, but they just want to hurry up. But he was right. Devontae Smith knew he didn't catch it and got the rest of the Eagles offense to hurry to the line.
Yeah, he was doing the full sprint, doing this, like doing the hurry up sign. And I was actually, when I was watching that game, my first thought was like, there's been a lot of talk about Sirianni and whether or not we think he's a good or great coach. And there's Demon himself last week was saying he didn't think he was that great of a coach. And the jury's out, I think, but I think that's good coaching. I think having the guys ready and in their head having them know, like, okay, if it's questionable, don't hesitate and make sure. And everybody getting up there that quickly, I was impressed by that. I thought that was because you got to take every advantage you can get in the playoffs. And hindsight 2020, I don't know if it makes that big of a difference. I mean, the Purdy injury withholding, but that was their first touchdown and their only touchdown until close to 2 minutes left in the half. So that's they stole one there, and that's what you got to do to win in the playoffs sometimes.
But let's assume they didn't steal it. Let's assume they did overturn that. Now we've got 24-7. So this is what I mentioned earlier, that I want to give credit to the team that won. I don't want either media or Niners fans, I know you're hurting, to say, oh, it's because of this. Because let's review some. Yeah, they did a great job in pass defense. They did a great job confusing Jalen Hurts. I think he wasn't that comfortable. There wasn't a lot of pressures. Anthony put down, by the way, if you're just listening on the podcast, make sure to check out the YouTube. We are live on YouTube right now. Anthony's got all sorts of nuggets scrolling across the bottom. Said that the Niners only had 4 pressures on Hurts, and none of them were sacks. So they weren't necessarily getting to him. Credit to the number 1 offensive line in the NFL. We talked about that last week. But there were still some discipline issues. So you think about the Boston Scott, or was it the Boston's, one of the Miles Sanders touchdowns, where he took it off to the left. Dre Greenlaw with Jason Kelsey out front tried to cut to the inside instead of keeping outside contain. Touchdown. The Boston Scott touchdown to the right, where Nick Bosa caved in instead of keeping outside contain, and that allowed Scott just enough room to get to the pylon there. These are kind of the little plays, like these amazing players. Nick Bosa, probably going to get Defensive Player of the Year, making these small mistakes, and then you really get into the roughing the punter that kept the drive alive. I mentioned earlier 11 total penalties. Dre Greenlaw, like doing a Muhammad Ali on the football.
That was funny.
It was funny, but it's like, what are you doing?
It wasn't smart. I think the whistle had blown. Stuff like that. I mean, we've talked about this a lot on this podcast. The margin for error is razor thin in the playoffs, and great teams like Philadelphia are going to make you pay. And we've seen San Francisco be the team that makes people pay for those same kinds of mistakes, and it just wasn't their day. And I think if anything is impacted more than the literal outcome, it's the game script. I think Philly didn't necessarily have to do anything crazy to win that game. I think they kind of gathered that. Josh Johnson and one-armed Purdy weren't really doing the thing. So I think game script wise, like they were kind of I've seen some chat about how Hurts played in the game, and I think Hurts played a winning game. I think Hurts played a winning formula. Sometimes that's the cards you're dealt. Sometimes you got a pocket ace and you don't have to go create, you can play it safe and you don't have to go all in. Like I was impressed by just how fundamentally sound Philadelphia was and how swiftly they slammed and kept the door shut. that's what good teams do.
Yeah,
And
you have a great defense that's playing great. You recognize that the other side doesn't have uh, a viable quarterback,
yeah.
even with Josh Johnson in there, and even when he left. So you play smart. You don't need to pass the ball. You're
Mhm.
not having success doing it anyway. Credit to the secondary. I thought one of the biggest weaknesses, maybe the only weakness on this Niners team, was the secondary. They were not in this game. Charvarius
That's true.
Ward did a fantastic job
He was
on
great.
AJ Brown. But as I mentioned on Friday, the Eagles find ways to win. You can shut down their deep passing game. And one thing to monitor when we got 2 weeks to talk about the Super Bowl,
Oh, let's
is
go.
Hurts missed a few passes. There was one where AJ Brown did beat, it was Jimmy Ward that was on him, and he had a full like 2 steps on him. If Hurts puts that on the money, that's a 60-yard touchdown pass, and
Yeah,
it was
he airmailed
overthrown.
that one. Yeah.
Airmailed, and there was another one deep that he threw that sailed out of bounds.
Yeah.
But that didn't matter because they were finding ways to win on the ground. They weren't getting huge chunk gains, but they stuck to it. They were getting enough to move the chains. They've got their little double cheek push, rugby scrum, fourth down play that works. And then they found ways to take advantage, like those 2 touchdown runs that I mentioned, where if the discipline wasn't perfect by the Niners, the Eagles took advantage and got in the end zone. Miles Sanders with 2 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
Anthony at the bottom has the Trent Williams pile driver
scuffle.
body slam thing. By that time, I don't view that as a factor in the game. It was more just a sign of frustration. Both players got penalized. Both players got ejected. So I don't view that as a mishap because the game was already out of hand by that point.
It's definitely tough when those situations happen, and you can tell it's pretty often it's frustration, and their season's coming to an end. It's pretty sad. I mean, you'd like to see it wrap up a little bit more peacefully. I'll be honest with you, there is like this beast inside of me that when that stuff happens, I just go I just get so excited, like I just like stand up and yell, like especially if it's the Bills and somebody hits Josh, like I don't care what happens. Like when Mitch Morse went after Wilkins, I wasn't that fired me up. But that's just like that's just caveman stuff. I don't think it's smart football.
Yeah, and there's one play in particular we'll talk about with the next game that are kind of in that realm. That's most of the thoughts I have. I wanted to address Purdy, and I think that it was unfortunate that he came out of this game, but I don't think that should change his status to be the starter at the beginning of the 2023 season.
Yeah, I agree. I think we'd be remiss to not give a shout out to the loyal Niners fans who listen to the show. We had some really fun banter before the game, and I'll say this isn't the victory lap I was hoping for, so I'm not going to take it. I was happy that Brian said it. He picked the right game. I picked the Eagles, so there's part of me that's happy. But yeah, you never want it to go down.
I didn't want
that.
It this way. I wanted, this is the NFC title game. These are the 2 best teams in the National Football Conference.
Yeah.
And we wanted to see a slugfest. And
Definitely.
We got to see that in the AFC, but I wanted to see it in both, to where the best team just edges out. And we were robbed of that a little bit.
Definitely.
Pick right or wrong. Doesn't feel like that's, like, I don't want to lean on that. I didn't get to see the 2 best teams at full strength.
No, that was pretty sad. And I will say this, Brian, and I really would love your thoughts, because I was watching the game with a lot of people, and I was a little bit surprised that they didn't go to a backup, like, emergency QB sooner when Johnson went down. I was hoping to see. I know we did get a McCaffrey pass attempt. It was ridiculous. We got it, and I felt like it was too late. But I was hoping to see somebody try to, maybe some wildcat, like it's Kyle Shanahan, like I was a little bit disappointed that they didn't pivot sooner off of the one-armed Purdy. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a little bit, I actually don't disagree as much of what Shanahan did. I think he was a little bit shell-shocked, and it's like, what do you do?
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, Elijah Mitchell was out. He was ruled out this game. We didn't necessarily know. When we had the preview show, I didn't know Mitchell was going to be out. He didn't practice at all, ended up not being active. So your next running back up is Jordan Mason, a rookie, or Tevin Coleman, who is, past his prime at this point.
Yeah.
I know he's a previous Niner, but he hasn't been on. He's only been there for a few weeks.
Right.
So you need Christian McCaffrey in the backfield. You could talk about using Debo, but then you're one less wideout weapon. behind Ayuk and Kittle. So I think that was it, is that he didn't want to put, if you had Elijah Mitchell, I think it would have been different because
Yeah.
Mitchell could be the lead back.
Could have
you
a
could
real
have
running back, yeah.
McCaffrey back there. You could still have Debo and Ayuk and Kittle on the outside because they've got a great secondary. You have to keep them honest. So I think that was Shanahan's thinking, is that I can't, one of my, if not my best weapon right now, I can't put him at quarterback. Yes, it's Wildcat and all, but Wildcat is not a sustainable long-term thing. That the Dolphins did it back in 2008, but that's because nobody knew. It was just so new, and we actually got to the playoffs behind Tony Sperano doing that.
Fun.
But that's not something in 2022, 2023 that you can sustain for an entire game. You can do it a play here and there, but if I'm Shanahan, I want to be able to put McCaffrey out wide if I need to in the slot. I need to have him in the backfield. That's very limiting if you have him taking the snaps. And then the next guy up is Kyle Juszczyk. It's like, you really got to go to like your fifth or sixth quarterback, a fullback.
Yeah, it definitely is like the sort of thing that is like hindsight's 2020. But I was just like, I don't know. I played NFL Street growing up, and I recently bought it. And so I have running backs play quarterback all the time, and it works great on the video game. So why not in real life?
Yeah, against this very well coached Jonathan Gannon Eagles defense, I think it could have been good for a few chunk gains here or there, maybe a crazy touchdown. But also remember, the only score they had is because Christian McCaffrey went Superman and shredded like 4 tackles to get in the end zone in the first place, or else it would have been a shutout. So why do you want to take that guy out of that role? You're not going to be able to get him out in the flat. You're not going to be able to get him out against these linebackers for Philadelphia. You're stuck in the backfield for gimmicky plays.
Yeah,
no,
it's a really fair point. Yeah,
I think that was what it was. It's just an unfortunate situation. Yeah, I don't know that there are contingency plans for that. Your contingency plan was, hey, hopefully Jimmy Garoppolo didn't get injured, and hopefully Trey Lance didn't get injured. But then you don't get the Brock Purdy experience. It's like you can't.
Yeah, there's just too
part
many.
Of the game. It's very unfortunate for Niners fans, for football fans, because we didn't get to see the best of the best go at each other. But I want to say that I still think the Eagles would have won this game. The pressure rate would have been the same, 61.9 against the starting offensive line, none of which came out in this game. That's still there versus the Niners, who only got 4 total pressures. I mean, that regardless of penalties or missed catches or lost quarterbacks, that's still the same. Any last thoughts on this game before we move on to the AFC?
I'll just put the bow on it. That I'll just tie that bow that you just very eloquently wrapped around it. I think it was just it was a battle of the trenches, and Philly won on both sides of the ball, and they're going to be fun to watch. They're going to be a fun team to watch in the Super Bowl, man. I really they've been the team all year, and I was saying that last week when they were one loss, and it was that kind of crazy game to the Commanders. Outside of the Minshew games, I don't know if this team loses a game. They might be 16-1 if Hurts plays 17. So yeah, it'll be really fun to see them go up against our next team that we're going to be talking about.
We had for the 30 Minutes of Football show a weekly power rankings draft, which was Jimmy Ray from the NFL_stats account on Twitter.
Awesome dude.
And I'm going to try to have him on before the Super Bowl so we can get some of his thoughts. But they were our number 1 in the power rankings for almost the entire season. And everybody's like, oh, but the Chiefs are better and the Bills would beat them. And I'm like, yeah, but they're undefeated. They keep winning. They're finding that they seem like a fully balanced team who doesn't have weaknesses, no glaring weaknesses. And now they're in the Super Bowl. So I think finally everybody's like, okay, this team is legit. This team is from top to bottom, best offensive line, best pass rush, best secondary, one of the best wide receiver tandems. It's just across one of the best quarterbacks. So let's talk about who they will be going up against. Jumping to the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs, who a lot of people didn't give a chance to, which is crazy if you really think about it. If you get out of the heat of the moment, and like NFL.com's power rankings had the Bengals as the number 1 team after the divisional round, and Joe Burrow undefeated against Mahomes with the ankle injury, and even I bought into that a little bit. We got to remember that this is still Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, 5 straight AFC championship games. Mahomes is, I think, a lock to win the MVP this year. Yeah. And that's why I ultimately ended up picking them. Number 1 was to go against you two, you and me. But it was also like, think Mahomes will find a way to win this game at home. Are they going to continue to let themselves get dominated by the Bengals? And even those wins weren't domination. All those 3 Bengals wins were 3-point victories. So I felt that the Chiefs could find a way. I felt it could be beneficial for Mahomes to know that he has the ankle injury and he needs to play smarter. And you saw a lot of that early on where he was just taking smart, quick passes, a lot of dump offs because he didn't want to. He ended up having to scramble later. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Mahomes and Reed, Chiefs, back in the Super Bowl for the 3rd time in 5 years. Guys, we got to remember this is still the Kansas City Chiefs at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah, they definitely showed us and reminded us who they are. I would like to say, first and foremost, there was so much hullabaloo surrounding this game. It was maybe the most talked about, most smack talk I've ever seen before an NFL game. It was pretty awesome to watch as a fan, just because like you see that much dunking, and it was mostly by one side. Let's be real. I mean, we have the Cincinnati mayor coming on and trolling Mahomes and calling
so
it
stupid, by the way.
Burrowhead.
So like you
So
talk about the
stupid.
ultimate bulletin board
Bulletin
material.
board.
It's one thing if players or coaches say anything, but the mayor of an entire city, a political figure,
Yep.
recording a video
That was
and putting it
insane.
out, calling it Burrowhead. It's like
You got
dude.
you got Burrowhead, you got the ticket drama, you got Eli Apple just running his mouth. You know, it definitely, there was a little bit of shall I say, karma served, a little bit of humble pie served to the Cincinnati Bengals, and we'll talk about that. Actually, I think we should, game flow wise, Brian. This game felt like a haymaker from the Chiefs, followed by a haymaker from the Bengals, followed by jabs by both teams until the end. And I did not know who was going to get the last shot. I was so like, this was the most excited I've been for a playoff game. I was watching with bated breath. I was absolutely blown away by everything that happened in that game. The Mahomes fumble the most. I thought that fumble was shocking.
Yeah.
Seeing a player of his caliber and of his pedigree making a play like that, I was pretty surprised. And then watching him try to recover it, and just, it was kind of like a disaster. There was a lot of but if we go in order, coming out, seeing Chris Jones do what Chris Jones does to the Bengals banged up offensive line that we talked about, 1.5 offensive linemen, that was, Chris Jones is the MVP of the game in my opinion.
Yeah, so I'll give my quickly high-level thoughts, and then I do want to break down the game.
Definitely.
Because this game is a game that deserves to be broken down that way, as opposed to the Niners-Eagles game. So I mean, you never really know, but I was confident throughout the entire game that the Chiefs would find a way to win this, just based on how they had played the entire game. Without that Mahomes fumble, it's not even close at the end.
Runaway.
They were going to score. They were already in Bengals territory. They were going to score another touchdown, or at least a field goal, to go up by 2 scores in the 4th quarter, or maybe it was late in the 3rd. And they just had been controlling both lines of scrimmage. Doesn't matter that Mahomes had the ankle injuries, finding ways to make plays. Kelsey gets in the end zone, and then you mentioned Chris Jones single-handedly wrecking them.
Oh my goodness.
Jones actually had. They'd mentioned on the broadcast that he, missed 2 sacks of Burrow in last year's AFC Championship game, where Burrow got away, and apparently that haunted him throughout the entire season, because he is an MVP candidate, or Defensive Player of the Year candidate. I think Bosa will win it, but Chris Jones is in that conversation.
Good.
Best interior lineman. We talked about it when we were going over PFF grades. He's like 91 or 92 for the season.
Yeah.
He was a guy who was already elite, became a man possessed this year. And I think we can actually tie it to those missed sacks. So when you get the opportunity now in the AFC Championship game again, Chris Jones was not going to be denied. But let's talk about that entire first quarter, because that, I think, set the precedent. Even though we know the Bengals came back, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
50% of the passes in that first quarter were QB pressures by the Chiefs. I remember saying, I was even tweeting this out, the second they got that second sack, I'm like, that's twice as many sacks as Buffalo had all last week. And then right after that, they got a 3rd sack. I'm like, oh, well, make that 3. We finally saw what we thought would happen last week, but we just forgot that the Bills' pass rush is just not very good right now without Von Miller.
27th in pressure,
But this patchwork offensive line with 3 backups and 1 center not at 100%. I love how you put it last week. 1.5 starting offensive linemen going up against the team who was second in the NFL in sacks with 55 total sacks, second only to the Eagles, who had 70. and Chris Jones having a historic year for an already great player, and he single-handedly wrecked this. 6 QB pressures by himself. He had the crucial sack on the 3rd down in 4th quarter, which ended up forcing the Bengals to punt. Credit the Bengals for adjusting, which have done. I used to think Zach Taylor wasn't a good coach. He's proven me wrong. Lou Anarumo,
great coach.
we're now seeing already he's getting head coach
Captain
interviews in Arizona. Captain Lou, and there was only 25% of pressures for the rest of the game. Of course the crucial play with Chris Jones I just mentioned. So the Bengals adjusted, but that set the precedent. The fact that the Chiefs came up and you mentioned a haymaker, punched the Bengals in the mouth at home and got up to that 13-3 lead. Really set the tone for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I was super, super impressed, mostly because Mahomes was, for the most part, seemingly doing it on one leg. I mean, the scrambling wasn't really there. The pocket maneuverability was, I would say. It seemed like he was still able to do a little dance in the pocket, which always works great for him. But finding Kelce...
It got worse.
It did.
If you notice that, whether it was adrenaline or just because he hadn't done much with it, he looked fairly normal. He was being conservative with his movement, but he looked okay. But then as the game went on, I think the fumble and certainly the recovery attempt was due to the ankle. I think he missed on a number of passes. There was one where he threw it almost straight into the ground with no pressure because of that ankle. So
he skipped one to Sky Moore.
Yes, we did see it start to affect him more later in the game.
Wasn't there a tweak? I think there might have been a tweak. There was a play specifically where he was like running towards the sidelines, and then he did his jump hop.
He did you could see that he was in pain.
I think you're right. I think
that Dynasty chat I mentioned earlier, somebody was like, "Oh, he's not injured." I'm like, I think he's injured. And then of course we saw that. I'm like, yeah, he's definitely injured. He's playing in pain. I saw at least 3 instances where you could tell it like flared up at the end of a scramble or at the end of a throw, to where he started planting funny and throwing off his left foot, like leaning forward for one of them. But then he makes that laser touchdown pass to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, where it's just, I mean, like, wow. He still found ways to get it done.
There was so many of those plays. So the first touchdown to Kelce, I was pretty wowed by as well. I mean, Kelce, on whatever's up with his back, Kelce was amazing in this game, as always. So they go up 13-3, and then it was before half, right, that Cincinnati started crawling back.
Right.
Yeah.
They made the adjustments. The offensive line, they started to bring in 2 guys in the backfield, like another tight end. And, of course, they have either Pirine or Mixon. They did a lot of extra protection for Burrow, and it made a difference. So you got to credit Zach Taylor for making that adjustment to help the protection after that disastrous first quarter.
There were some plays where Burrow was taking like 9-step drops, and I was like, it's risky, but it was really smart because it didn't matter what kind of pressure they were getting because he was so far back. Like, I was really, really, you're right. Schematically, they masked the weakness, which I think is what good coaches do. Like
they had that one run where they spread out the offense. It was a 3rd down, like 3rd and long, 3rd and 8 and 9. And Burrow immediately just took up right up the middle and got like 11 yards, and there was no one around. So he did a great job of stepping up, especially later in that game. His pocket presence is incredible. It's like Peyton or Brady, like the way that they could move in a pocket, and Burrow's even more athletic than those guys. So they were able to get around it and at least temporarily get back in the game.
He's unbelievable. And we saw that. We saw we saw both sides of Burrow in this game, I'll say. The holding onto the ball for a really long time kind of bit him early, and then later in the game, some of those careless decisions with the football. 2 picks, very uncharacteristic. I was kind of
and at least 1 or 2 other dropped picks. There was that one I think it was the first drive, and it might have been Trent McDuffie who read it beautifully and should have come up with that interception and just dropped it.
Yeah, a little surprising to see him get so flustered, even in his own stadium. That was a little bit surprising, but but that being said, no, there was some really, really solid efforts from Burrow. The touchdown pass to Higgins was like, oh my goodness, and the catch.
They should have done more of that. That's where they had the advantage, is in the quality of their receivers against the very young an inexperienced Chiefs secondary.
Especially when Snead went out so early.
Yes.
It felt like they were going to get picked on. I was actually nervous for their secondary, and it felt
Right.
they kind of honestly I felt like they kind of answered the call. I felt like the Chiefs. I mean, they Higgins was kind of dominant, and Chase had that insane 4th and 6 conversion, like 40 yards down
over
the field.
double coverage. And it's like they were, but that and the Higgins touchdown, which he was also double covered on, that was just the quality of the Bengals receivers. Just it didn't matter that you covered them with 2 guys. They couldn't do enough. And I maybe I would have wanted to see more of that from Cincinnati. Like, just hurl it up to Chase. Do what Cousins did with Justin Jefferson against Buffalo and some of these games where they went like, your guys are not just a little bit better, they are leaps and bounds better, so that even if they're double covered, they can't be stopped. And the Chiefs secondary, there was the one play by Cook where it was a bomb to Higgins and Cook tapped it. It was one of the interceptions.
Yes.
Like, that was a phenomenal play, but I don't think they would have done that consistently. I think you should have tested them deep more, and you should have just thrown more jump balls and know that your guy, when you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, are going to come down with them more often than not.
Well, and I believe that pick was even on a 3rd and long. So I thought to myself, that's maybe as good as a punt at that point.
It was.
I mean, they didn't have much of a return at all.
And they didn't score. It didn't turn into points.
Yeah, there was so much of that in this game. Like, it was Brian, it was the ultimate football game. Like, it was chess. It was I throw rock, you throw paper, I throw scissors. It was so fun to watch, and like, yeah,
you used rock paper scissors analogies last week too. I can see this is a pattern. That's it works.
It's a good one. And no, I was definitely just like very much like, who is going to win? Who is going to come out on top of this game? Like, so at the time of the Mahomes fumble, I believe the Chiefs were up 7.
20-13 at that point.
20-13, and it was shocking because he has this sheen on him that he doesn't make the big mistake or the big turnover. I know he did it in overtime last year, but when you win a Super Bowl, you get a little bit of leeway with the discourse, with the narratives. But that turnover was critical, and it was unforced. Mm-hmm. I was so surprised, and to see Cincinnati immediately capitalize on that, man, that set up for a great 4th quarter.
To me, it had to be ankle. That's not something like the great Patrick Mahomes, maybe the best quarterback, or at least one day we can say will have been the best quarterback to ever play in the NFL, to just the ball slip out of his hands when it's not a weather-related issue. I think his ankle at that point was very much top of mind. Certainly when he tried to recover it, you could tell he didn't want to plant on that foot and just kind of flopped down.
Kind of fell, not good.
Was not going to help him come up with that fumble. But it has to be that, because the second he's planting on that right foot, on that back foot, and if there's a twinge of pain, and it's just he's thinking about that as opposed to his normal mechanics. That's what I assumed at the time. I'm like, that has to be. Why would he just do that? Either it's just horrible luck, which I guess is certainly a possibility, or it's that there was little things with that ankle injury that we weren't even considering, and that when he steps back, when he plants in a certain way on that back right leg where that high ankle sprain is, he's thinking about that and less about how he's gripping the football, and then it slips right out of his hands.
Yeah, it was definitely surprising, but it did make for some drama, which as football fans, we do tend to love. So Cincinnati comes back, and remind me again, what was the scoring drive? Was that 10 minutes left in the game, or I forget if that was...
It was less than that. I feel like they scored with like 5 or 6 minutes left. It was fairly late in the 4th quarter. I didn't take notes on the timestamps, so I don't remember.
And then Kansas City got the ball back, and then they correct me if I'm wrong, they had to punt again. Cincinnati had another crack at it. Or
yes,
was that...
well, that's when the Chris Jones sack happened.
Yes, okay.
The Bengals got the ball back and they went down to the 2-minute warning. Yeah, so there was 2 minutes left.
That was wild.
And then they were able to move the ball. They had, I think Hayden Hurst had a big play on 3rd down.
That was awesome.
And so then it gets to like a minute and a half-ish left, maybe even less than that. And then it get down to 3rd down, and Chris Jones, they lined him on the outside against the backup right tackle, whose name I had in here somewhere, but I don't have it written down. The backup right tackle, and Jones just right around him, gets to Burrow, forces the punt. And here's the thing that I want to mention. We're going to talk about the roughing, not the roughing the passer, the unnecessary roughness out of bounds. But Bengals fans and NFL fans in general are already forgetting that Sky Moore had a huge punt return, or else that's not even a factor.
Yeah.
Right? If Sky Moore doesn't return that punt to close to midfield, so where now they're on the verge of field goal range without a penalty, then none of that even happens. Then a 15-yard penalty doesn't mean anything, and they probably wouldn't have gotten close enough. In cold weather, where a long field goal was going to be difficult, it was like the wind chill was less than 10 towards the end of the game. I think it was like 5 or 6. Oh. So you can't talk about. Jay Feely was saying pre-game that nobody was really trying to kick beyond like 50 yards or so. Then it's less of a difference. However, there was the punt returns. Sky Moore got them in a position where all they needed was maybe 15-ish yards to get it, and then the penalty makes all the difference. Tell me about that play, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts.
Yeah, so the punt return was unbelievable. Sky Moore is definitely a great athlete, and I'm definitely very excited to see what he can do in that offense.
And quickly, he has had trouble fielding punts this year. There have been multiple times. They lost the Colts game earlier in the season, which was crazy. Insane to think now that the Colts beat this team. But Sky Moore, I feel like he had at least 3 or 4 muffed punts that ended up as a turnover. So this is a guy who is rookie season. Everybody's like, oh, is he the next Tyreek? Unfair comparison. But a lot of expectations on. They're looking for these playmakers. We didn't even talk about the Chiefs' injuries. We'll break that down when we talk about the Super Bowl, because Kadarius Toney, Juju Smith-Schuster, Mecole Hardman, they all left this game.
Yeah.
But Sky Moore, in a moment where he needed to make a play, not just for his team, but to redeem himself for some early season struggles with punts, gets the punt return of his life.
Yeah, that was incredible, man. Yeah, he's got a lot of potential in that offense. It was difficult at times this year. I held him in Dynasty. There was a couple times where I thought about cutting him for X, Y, or Z, and I did decide to hold Sky Moore, and I think I'm gonna be happy about that decision. He made a heck of a play at a heck of a moment. I believe it was 39 seconds that they punted back to the Chiefs, and we that's 3 times too much. Exactly.
Yeah, you know exactly what 13 seconds can
That's
do.
exactly 3 times too much. So seeing Mahomes with that time, even with I felt like this was where we saw the injury the most, the hobbling and the in play struggling, the not great throws, but he did enough to set them up with a 3rd and 4 with, what was it, 20 seconds left? Was it 1 timeout or no timeout?
No, they had used their timeout because they got the ball to Pacheco, and Pacheco didn't get out of bounds. I remember thinking, like, why you have 1 timeout? Why are you? I know you're trying to get extra yards, dude, but get out of bounds. Save that timeout.
It felt like he could have gotten out of bounds.
He could have. He had an opportunity to. He did get extra yards there, but they had to use their final timeout because he kept in bounds.
So the 3rd and 4, Mahomes sees the lane. He does what he does best. He gets out of the pocket. He sees the lane, and he hits it. And you know what? I have to be 100% honest with you, Brian. I'm excited for this conversation because I think I'm guessing we're going to be on the same page. But that's 3 steps out of bounds.
Oh, it's not even close.
It's so sorry to the Bengals fans.
I want to give credit to Mahomes first, because and we mentioned his ankle was visibly worse throughout that game. It affected I think it caused the turnover, certainly caused his ability to get the fumble back. It caused multiple errant throws, that Sky Moore one being the most egregious, where it just went like straight down into the ground.
Yeah.
And here he is with 20 seconds left, looking like he's normal Patrick Mahomes, scrambling, beating the team to the first down line. He already had the first down. Let's remember that too. So you can say all you want, Bengals fans, about whether that penalty happens or not, but he did have the first down, and I still think they would have had a shot at the field goal. But then, yes, he is
3 steps.
It's textbook unnecessary roughness. It's textbook. There's no question around that. His entire body is out of bounds. Osai's body was out of bounds. They were both fully out of bounds. It's not even like Osai was still in. They were both across the out of bounds marker, and then he puts his hands on him and shoves him down. It's a penalty. It's 101. If there's a physical rule book, I'm sure there is somewhere.
Yeah.
That's exactly that reads with how you should throw that flag. So there's no reason they shouldn't have thrown that flag.
I understand why it's a tough call to make in that moment, but that doesn't mean you don't call it. I feel like if you don't call that, it's worse. I feel like you're in Arrowhead. I feel like they might start throwing stuff on the field. That was 3 steps. That's their, couple $100 million man quarterback. Like, you really can't shove them
And
three
the,
steps.
the argument like, oh, let them play, it's the AFC title game, when it's that egregious, you can't
Yeah.
just let them play, because how is that fair to the Chiefs? If it's not like, okay,
Right.
it's a questionable hold or a questionable defensive penalty where like there was at least one on the Bengals where they called a defensive pass interference, and I'm like, that was weak. Like, he had his arm around his back. Like, that's normal
Yeah.
defensive play. You're not actually obstructing the receiver. That
Yeah.
I get. This was egregious. This was
Yeah.
not. You can't just not call that for the sake of letting them play.
Yeah. I was a little disappointed to see all that discourse surrounding that play. Of course, Bunker comes in, drills the field goal. We get
And
a music.
he's had a bit of a rough season too, so it's
Yeah.
nice to see. It's a redemption story.
And
For
it
him.
was 45 yards, but the way it cleared the crossbar, it looked like it was 60. I
Yeah,
was
he
like,
crushed it. He crushed it.
he crushed it, but it was crazy how it was like a rainbow, and then like it died like right when it got like it was crazy how like I was like, wow, he really, because of the cold weather you mentioned, it made it like harder to kick the ball, and so for him to make that kick in that moment with those stakes, that was awesome. That made me happy for him. And yeah, the failed Music City Miracle on the other side was,
And that was. I don't even want to talk about that. I want to talk about another play that we have to acknowledge.
Oh, sure.
So,
yeah, I'm happy to talk about that too.
You know where I'm going
100%.
with this one.
Definitely.
Third
and
down,
9.
just inside Bengals territory. I don't even remember the result of the play. Oh, it was the penalty, right? They had the 10-yard hold, or was this after the hold?
So it was
a lot of weirdness happened there.
I think I can break it down. I think I remembered. It was 3rd and 9.
Yeah.
7-yard pass to Kelsey, 4th and 2.
That's right. Yeah.
Ref blows it dead. Clearly, again, I'm sorry to I'm gonna put a lot of cold water on the conspiracy theorists and the hot water and the fire on Twitter. They showed it again. The ref blows it dead. He's running in. He's got his arms waving. The play plays out, and it's favorable for the Bengals, but the play was blown dead, so they have to do it again. And on the second one, 3rd and 9, that's their second try. Apple holds, and they get a first down, and everybody loses their minds.
But let's talk about why it was rewound. So I don't know if you saw there is a wide angle of the back judge coming onto the field before that ball is snapped.
Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and waving like, "Hey, because the clock was running. The previous play, the second down play, was an incomplete pass. The clock should have stopped. Initially, they stopped it, but then they started running it again. So anybody who's like, "Oh, I can't believe they would stop and redo this," because there was no indication. You didn't see it on the initial broadcast, but the wider view angle shows the back judge running onto the field trying to signal. Nobody saw him. They snapped the ball. It was the right thing to redo that play. It sucks, and
it does.
We can talk about the sloppiness of the officiating. Why did nobody else notice that the clock was running? Why was it up to the back judge? Why did nobody see the back judge when he was signaling? Sloppiness for sure. You can say sloppiness in the Eagles-Niners game, missing that catch, although that was tough.
That's a tough call.
Maybe Shanahan and somebody in their booth should have seen it.
Somebody should have challenged it. Yeah, if he saw him running up and doing that, maybe he could have challenged it.
But for this game, it was the right thing. Like they didn't
100%.
They didn't botch it. The sloppiness was there, but it should have been replayed.
Brian, we both watched every snap of the AFC wildcard game, Bills-Dolphins. I can recall that happening 3 separate times, where a full play played out, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, but the Bills took a timeout before the play."
Yep.
Do you remember those several times? And the fans were booing. Oh, the play happened. No, it didn't.
Doesn't matter.
It literally happened, but it literally didn't happen. You know what I mean? Like, it's. I'm sorry, but it's such a non-thing to me, and to see it be made the headline from the game is really it's a bummer for me, because I loved the game, and it was
still a fantastic game.
It didn't affect the results at all.
The Bengals still had a chance. Correct, they still had a chance. They punted it against, with that Chris Jones sack, and they allowed a punt return by Sky Moore to even have them in the vicinity, and then they couldn't stop Mahomes on the scramble, and then add insult to injury. Osai clearly shoves him 2 or 3 steps out of bounds. The Chiefs earned it. The Chiefs deserved the victory. They played better football, especially at the line of scrimmage, defensive line to Bengals offensive line. Let's wrap this up, and let's take a very, very super brief, high-level look at the Super Bowl. We'll have 2 weeks to cover that. Last thoughts on Bengals Chiefs.
So last thoughts on Bengals Chiefs. I jokingly said probably about 30 times yesterday that it's NFL versus Bengals. I don't really think that's the case. I'm sorry. Like it's definitely unfortunate that some of the breaks didn't go their way. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. We said that earlier with the quarterback thing. It's not always pretty. It's not always great, but the great teams, I think the best teams are still standing, and
Yeah.
that's going to be exciting to see.
Both number one seeds.
Yep. Um, as far as high level thoughts, it was I would say it was a little bit of a disappointing championship Sunday that we had the we lost Purdy for that game.
Especially on the NFC side, yeah.
Yeah, it was very disappointing in that game. But you got to take the good with the bad with football. We had an outstanding second game. We talked about how the wild card round was a lot better than the divisional round. Hopefully, the Super Bowl can follow suit with the wild card and with the second game. Hopefully, we can get some of that Super Bowl magic that we all just live for. Some of those.
I hope Mahomes is 100%. I hope Hurts is 100%.
And I
hope
think
no
he will
one gets
be.
injured in this game.
2
But you
weeks.
know what? It might. There might
Yeah.
be injuries. That's just how this
There might be
plays
bad
out.
officiating.
Yep.
It is what it is. We take the good with the bad. And I honestly, Brian, I'm very, very refreshed to talk to you about this because I knew I could count on you for some reasonable, logical football takes.
That's what we do here at Legit Football.
I love that because I'm all for it. Like everybody was joking yesterday that because I'm all for the emotional roller coaster of the playoffs. I ride the ride. You know what I mean? I enjoy it. But when the ride's over, I look back at it and I say, oh yeah, I can see like I can trace the line and I can see logically how we got here, and that's why I love football because in the moment it's just happening, and then it's
Emotions take over.
it is what it is exactly, and fan bases, I get it. I trust me, I do.
Yeah, he gets it.
I get it.
Everybody thought, including me, that the Bills would be the one going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I think if anything, I think this weekend shows that there are tiers of quarterbacks, and I think that I do believe it's safe to say that Mahomes, Burrow, and Allen are in their own tier, and I think Hurts is knocking on that door. And I think a Super Bowl win maybe closes that gap.
I agree, and we can't wait to look forward to next season, and we will have all off season to look forward to next season. But Kevin, we do still have one game left in the 2022 season, and that is the Super Bowl. Philadelphia Eagles, early line, 2-point favorites against Patrick Mahomes with 2 weeks to heal up that ankle, and the Kansas City Chiefs, the Kelce brothers, Jason versus Travis. I think Anthony put up a stat earlier. It's the first time two brothers have ever played against each other in the Super Bowl.
That's
there you
awesome.
Go. Travis and Jason Kelce become the first brothers to face off in the Super Bowl. I told you about the New Heights podcast.
Yes.
You definitely have to listen to now.
Not a sponsor.
Those of you who haven't, no, definitely not. I wish. Kelsey brothers, reach out to me. We'll talk. But it's the fact that I've been listening to this podcast lead up through this, and the fact that they're now going to be playing against each other.
It's going to be a good episode.
Drops on Tuesdays. But yes, I mean, we got the two number one seeds. We got the two teams I was most looking forward to seeing. We got the two teams that I picked to go here. We will not make picks here. We got 2 weeks. We're going to have a preview episode for sure. We're going to talk about some off-season narratives over these next 2 weeks as well. Last thoughts as we wrap up conference championships.
I usually do my last thoughts in a super positive way, and I'm going to again today. I just can't help myself. I'm super grateful to get to talk about football. This is so fun. I'm super grateful that people listen and that we have an awesome listener base of people who we can interact with. And like I said, everybody who was here last week, and we had a little bit of a spicy pregame show. I'm excited to have more of those leading up to the Super Bowl, but also like I said, the cookie crumbles in the way that it does. And it's not always easy. It's not always pretty. It's not always digestible, but it is football. And that's the beauty of it, is that it's so unpredictable, and there has to be a winner. There has to be a loser. The Asai stuff has been killing me, man. The Asai stuff in the locker room, him on the bench for 10 minutes with his hands over his head. Like it's.
And he played a good game too.
He played a great game.
He was one of the better defenders for Cincinnati prior to that bad mistake.
It's just the tragedy of there's got to be a winner, there's got to be a loser, and these things happen. And I'm just
you feel bad for Purdy on the other side. What a such a whimper to end an amazing story. And like he's goes out after 3 plays, and then when he comes back in, he literally can't throw the ball more than 5 yards.
Devastating.
But it is what it is. That's football. We still have a Super Bowl left with the 2 best teams in the NFL, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Awesome.
I can't wait to watch it.
It's gonna be sick.
Kevin, as always, thank you. We will be
Thank
here
you,
again
Brian.
Friday. We will not do a Super Bowl preview on Friday. We're going to save that for next week. We're going to be talking about, hopefully there'll be some coaching announcements. It looks like D'Amico Ryans might be named that coach of the Texans this week, so we'll have some of those announcements. Vic Fangio, defensive coordinator of the Dolphins. We have a lot of stuff to cover. We'll do that on Friday. We'll have at least 1 or 2 more guests joining both Kevin and myself, so stay tuned for that. We will be live. We're going to do Legit Football Live going forward. We had started not to do it live because that was 30 minutes of football's thing, but we've got some great interactions here, so we're going to keep doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you, as always, guys, for listening. If you're just listening to the podcast, make sure to check out the YouTube because you get to see our ugly mugs talking about football, but you also get to get all of those amazing stats that Anthony Wayne, our producer, puts at the bottom of the screen. Pro Bowl season look back, 30 minutes of football Thursday. I like that. So check out 30 minutes of football this Thursday.
It's gonna be fun.
Looking at the Pro Bowl and the players that made that because they got the skills competition coming up. Thanks again for listening and watching. This has been Legit Football Podcast. We'll see you on Friday.